Hello, it is Ashley with STM's Crime and Paranormal Podcast. I am your host today, and today we are going to be talking about the murder of a Shanda Sharer. Shanda was born on June 6th of 1979 as Shanda Renee Sharer. Her father was Stephen Sharer and her mother was Jacqueline Bott, and she was born in Pineville, Kentucky. Shanda's parents would divorce later on in her life, and her mother would remarry and move the family to Louisville, Kentucky. Shanda would attend 5th and 6th grade at St. Paul School, where she was a cheerleader and played volleyball and softball. Her mother would then divorce again, and the family would move to New Albany, Indiana in June of 1991. Sharer would then be enrolled at the Hazelwood Middle School. Earlier that school year, she would then transfer to Our Lady of Perpetual Help School, which was a Catholic school in New Albany. And there she would join the girls' basketball team. So she decided to be on the basketball team whenever she went to this school. So Shanda Sharer would meet a girl named Amanda Heverin. She would meet her in the early fall semester at the Hazelwood Junior High. So before she went to the Catholic school, she would meet Amanda at the Hazelwood. The way that they met was actually from getting into a physical altercation. So they actually didn't get along at first, and then they ended up being friends. So somehow the two became friends while they were in detention and would later exchange romantic letters to one another. So they started to become romantically involved. Heverin had also been in a relationship with a girl named Melinda Loveless. Loveless would become so jealous of Heverin and Sharer's relationship. In early October of 1991, Heverin and Sharer would attend a school dance together. Loveless would find the two and confront them about the relationship. Being Heverin and Loveless, they never officially ended the relationship. So Loveless is thinking that Sharer had basically stolen her girlfriend from her. So Loveless would begin to talk about killing Shanda, and would start to threaten Shanda in public. Shanda Sharer's parents would start to get concerned about how the relationship with Heverin was beginning to affect their daughter. So Shanda would then transfer to the Catholic school in late November. So Heverin claims that she would give letters that Loveless had sent that contained death threats towards Shanda to a youth prosecutor, but the prosecutor would never do anything about these letters as far as Heverin had known. So she would give these letters to this youth prosecutor and they just didn't do anything to him. They never confronted Loveless about these threats that she was making towards Sharer at all. So there were 4 girls that were involved in this murder of Shanda. The first, of course, is being Melinda Loveless. She was also born in New Albany on October 28th of 1975, and she was the youngest of 3 girls. So I'm going to kind of go into the background of Melinda so you guys kind of know kind of her history. So her mother and father's name is Marjorie and Larry Loveless. Larry had been drafted into the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War and would come back scared emotionally, but still treated as a hero when he had returned. So his wife, however, would describe her husband as a sexual deviant whom would wear clothes and makeup that belonged to her and their daughters. After Larry was out of the military, he had a long history of not being able to hold down a job for very long. He was violent, he was abusive, he would impulsively spend money while the kids would often go hungry. So he would spend their money on just impulse buys and not buy the kids the things that they needed. So Melinda's mother, Marjorie, would try to commit suicide quite a few times while Melinda was little. It is unclear, but it is alleged that Larry had abused his daughters and other children. One incident is stated that he would fondle Melinda when she was an infant, molested Marjorie's 13-year-old sister earlier on in their marriage, and would then molest his daughter's cousin, Teddy, from when he was 10 to 14 years old. Teddy would testify against Larry, stating that he had tied up all 3 girls in a garage and raped them in succession. Both of Melinda's older sisters would agree that Larry, their father, had molested them, but Melinda would never admit that any of that had happened to her. Larry once fired a handgun in the direction of Melinda's older sister, Michelle, when she was only 7 years old, and he intentionally missed her. So he shot a gun at her and missed her, but he missed her intentionally. So he did this on purpose, but intentionally missed her, so he didn't hit her. So it is also alleged that he would embarrass his daughters by finding their underwear and smelling them in front of other family members. So in November of 1990, Larry got caught looking in on Melinda and one of her friends. So when Marjorie witnessed this, she then attacked him with a knife, and he was sent to an area hospital after he had tried to grab the knife from his wife. Larry would divorce Marjorie and eventually remarry, sending letters to Marjorie, trying to mess with her emotions, and then suddenly stopped all contact with her. So we're going to get to another perpetrator of this murder by the name of Laurie Tackett. I'll go through the history of her also, so you guys have a better understanding of who she is. So this next girl is Mary Lorraine Laurie Tackett, whom was born on October 5th of 1974 in Madison, Indiana. Her mother was a fundamentalist Pentecostal Christian, while her father worked in a factory and had 2 felony convictions that came about in the 1960s. So Tackett would claim that she was molested twice when she was a child. She says when she was molested, she was 5 and 12 years old. May of 1989, Tackett's mother would find out that her daughter was changing into jeans once she would get to school. This ended up in a huge altercation, and it ended with her mother trying to strangle her. Social workers then got involved, and her parents had to agree to surprise visits from the social workers to ensure that no child abuse was being done. So at one point, her and her mother got into another conflict when Tackett's mother would find out that Hope Rippey's dad had bought them a Ouija board. So don't forget, her mother is a fundamentalist Pentecostal Christian. So when she found out that her friend's dad had bought them a Ouija board, she got into a conflict with her daughter. Once Tackett turned 15 years old, she began to rebel and become fascinated with the occult. She would begin to experiment with self-harm, even more so in the early year of 1991 when she had begun to date a girl whom was also involved in the same practice. Once her parents discovered this, they checked her into a hospital on March 19th of 1991, where she was prescribed an antidepressant, and then she was just released. So 2 days after her release, her girlfriend, Toni Lawrence, and her had cut their wrist, and Tackett's was deep. So she then was returned to the hospital to treat her wounds and was then admitted to the psychiatric ward side. Tackett was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and would confess that she would experience hallucinations since she had been a young child. So she had been having hallucinations since she was young. And so this is what she admitted to the ward. She would later be discharged on April 12th and dropped out of high school in September of 1991. Tackett would stay in Louisville in October of 1991 with different friends of hers, and this is where she would meet Melinda Loveless in the late November. By December, Tackett would move back to Madison when her dad promised to buy her a car, but she still would spend most of her time in Louisville and in New Albany. So the next girl we're going to get to, her name is Hope Rippey, which I mentioned her when I was reading about Tackett. So, Hope Anna Rippey was born on June 9th of 1976 in Madison. Her father was an engineer at a power plant. Her parents had divorced in February of 1984, and she moved with her mother and siblings to Quincy, Michigan for 3 years. Her parents would then resume the relationship in Madison the year of 1987. So they got back together. She was then reunited with her friend Laurie Tackett and Tony Lawrence that she had known since childhood. Her parents, however, had always seen Tackett as a bad influence, and later Rippey would also begin to self-harm at the age of 15 years old. So that is Hope Rippey's little background. The next girl we're going to get to is Tony Lawrence, which you have heard be brought up with Hope and with Laurie. So we're going to get on to Tony Lawrence and kind of her background. She was born on February 14th of 1976 in Madison also. Her father was a Boilermaker. She had been close friends with Hope Rippey since they were young children. She claims to have been abused by a relative when she was 9 years old and raped by a teenage boy when she was 14. Police were only permitted to issue an order for the boy to keep away from Lawrence, and later she would go to counseling but would not follow through with her counseling. So she tried it and then she just didn't follow through with it. She then began to become promiscuous, self-harm, and would attempt suicide when she was only in the 8th grade. January 10th of 1992, Tony Lawrence, who was 15 years old, Hope Rippey, who was 15 years old also, and Laurie Tackett, who was 17 years old, would take Tackett's car and drive from Madison to Melinda Loveless's house in New Albany. So Rippey and Lawrence were both friends of Tackett, but hadn't yet met Melinda Loveless, who was 16 years old at this time. When they arrived at Melinda's house, they would borrow clothes from her. Loveless would then show the girls a knife and would tell them that she had intended to scare Shanda Sharer with the knife. None of the other 3 girls, besides Melinda Loveless, had ever met Shanda Sharer prior to this night, but Tackett would already know of Loveless's plan to intimidate the 12-year-old Shanda. So Shanda was quite a bit younger than these girls, and Loveless is just raging with jealousy. So Melinda would tell the other 2 girls that she didn't like Shanda because she was a copycat and she stole her girlfriend. Tackett would then let Rippey drive all 4 girls to Jeffersonville, where Shanda would stay with her father on the weekends. They stopped at a McDonald's on the way there to ask for directions because they didn't know how to get there. The girls arrived at Shanda's dad's house shortly before it became dark, and Melinda Loveless would tell Rippey and Lawrence to go to her door and introduce themselves as Hevron's friends and invite her to come with them to go see Hevron, who was waiting at the Witch's Castle, or otherwise known as Mistletoe Falls, which was a ruined house that was located on an isolated hill that would overlook the Ohio River. Shanda would tell the girls that she was not able to go while her parents were awake and would tell them to return around midnight, which was just a few hours later. At first, Melinda Loveless was pissed, but Rippey and Lawrence would assure her that they would return for Shanda later. So the 4 girls would then cross the river to Louisville and attend a punk rock show at the Audubon skate park that was located near Interstate 65. Lawrence and Rippy would get bored of the concert and later went back out to the parking lot where they engaged in sexual activities with two boys inside of Tackett's car. Later on, the girls would finally leave to return to go back and get Shanda. So Melinda Loveless would allegedly say that she could not wait to kill Shanda. However, she also said that she was just going to use the knife to frighten her. They would arrive at Shanda's house around 12:30 in the morning. Lawrence refused to go get Shanda, so Tackett and Rippy would go to the door instead. So Melinda Loveless would actually hide underneath of a blanket in the back seat of the car with the knife that she had in her possession. Rippy would tell Shanda that Hebron was still at the witch's castle, but Shanda was a bit reluctant to go with the girls, but she still agreed after she had changed her clothes. So I think at this time she probably was like, I don't know if I should do this. And then she still wanted to go. I mean, if her and Hebron were in love, you know, she still went. So once the girls got into the car, Hope Rippy would then start asking Shanda questions about her relationship with Hebron. That's when Melinda Loveless would jump up in the back seat and put the knife to Shanda's throat, starting to interrogate her about her sexual relationship with Hebron. They would drive towards Utica and the witch's castle. Tackett would tell the girls of an old local legend about the house being once owned by 9 witches, and the townspeople would burn down the house to get rid of the witches. Once they arrived to the witch's castle, Shanda would be sobbing at this point, taking her, at this point they were taking her inside with her arms and her legs bound with rope while she was sobbing and crying. Melinda Loveless would then start to taunt Shanda. She would talk about how pretty her hair was and said she would wonder how pretty she would look if they were to cut her hair off. Of course, this would scare Shanda even more than she was already scared, because, I mean, now this girl's talking about cutting her hair off. So Melinda would take off Shanda's rings and would hand a ring to each of the girls. At one point, Rippy would take Shanda's Mickey Mouse watch and start dancing to the tune that it would play. Like, these girls are just kind of, you know, they're sick. Tackett would then tell Sharer that the witch's castle had human remains in it and that hers would be next. So she told Shanda basically that they're going to kill her and her remains were going to be left in this house. She would then retrieve a shirt that had a smiley design on it from her car, light it on fire, but then she would fear that the fire would possibly be spotted by cars that would pass by. So instead, they just all left the witch's castle with Shanda. Shanda would beg these girls to just take her home during the car ride while they were leaving witch's castle. She just begged them to please take her home. She didn't want to be there. She just wanted to go home. So Loveless made Shanda slip off her bra, which she would then hand over to Rippy, who then slid her own bra off and replaced it with Shanda's while she was still steering the car. The girls then became lost and would stop at a gas station. They covered Shanda's body in a blanket while Tackett would go inside to ask for directions. Again, they didn't know where they were going. They needed directions. Lawrence would call a boy that she had known from Louisville and would talk for a few minutes trying to ease her worries about what was happening, but would not mention Shanda's abduction to him. The girls would then return to the car, but became lost once again, and they would pull over to another gas station. Lawrence and Rippy had spotted a couple of boys and would talk to them before they would get back in the car to leave. Later, they would finally arrive at the edge of some woods that was near Tackett's house in Madison. So Tackett would lead the girls to a dark garbage dump that was off of a logging road that was surrounded by dense forest. So it was surrounded by like trees and high grass and things like that. So Lawrence and Rippy were, however, they were frightened. So those two girls would decide that they were just going to stay in the car. They didn't want to have nothing to do with it right now. Loveless and Tackett would then make Shanda strip naked while Loveless would beat 12-year-old Shanda with her fist. Melinda Loveless would then slam Shanda's face into her knee multiple times, which would cause Shanda to cut her mouth on her own braces. Like, this girl is brutal. This is terrible. Melinda tried to slit Shanda's throat with a knife that she had, but it was too dull, so Rippy would get out of the car to hold Shanda down. Then Loveless and Tackett would take turns stabbing Sharer in the chest. They then strangled her with a rope until she would go unconscious. Like, they tortured this poor 12-year-old girl. She was then placed in the trunk of the car, and they would tell the other two girls that Shanda was now dead. So all the girls would go to Tackett's home that was nearby and would go inside to drink some soda and to clean up. At this point, when they were inside, they had heard Shanda screaming in the trunk. So Tackett would walk outside with a paring knife and stabbed her multiple times again, and then went back inside while she was covered in Shanda's blood. Tackett would then wash up from stabbing Shanda again and would then go and tell the girls their futures with their rune stones. So at 2:30 a.m., Lawrence and Rippy would stay behind while Tackett and Loveless decided that they were going to go country road cruising. They drove to a nearby town of Canaan where Shanda would continue to cry and make gurgling noises, so Tackett had to stop the car. When they would open the trunk, Sharer would sit up while she was covered in blood with her eyes rolled back in her head, unable to speak. So Tackett would then beat her with a tire iron until she went silent and told Melinda to smell it. The two girls would return back to Tackett's house before the sun had rose that morning to clean up again. So Rippy would then ask about Shanda, and Tackett would then laugh while telling them about the torture of Shanda. This ended up waking up Tackett's mother, who then yelled at Tackett for being out late and bringing the girls back to the house. So Tackett, she would then just take them home. And this was after 2:30 in the morning. She drove to a burn pile where they would open the trunk to stare at Shanda's badly beaten body, although Lawrence refused to look at her, and Rippy would spray Shanda with Windex, taunting her, saying, "You're not looking so hot now, are you?" The girls would then drive to a gas station that was near Madison Consolidated High School to pump some gas into the car and buy a 2-liter bottle of soda. Tackett would pour the soda out, and she would then fill up that bottle with gasoline. They drove north of Madison to Jefferson Proving Ground to Lemon Road off of US Route 21 or 421. It was a well-known place to Rippy. So Lawrence would remain in the car while Tackett and Rippy would wrap Shanda, who was still alive at this point, in a blanket and would carry her to a field by the gravel road. Tackett had Rippy pour gasoline onto Shanda, and they would set her on fire while she was still alive. So Melinda didn't think that Shanda was dead, so they would go back a few minutes later and pour the rest of the gasoline on her. The four girls then went to a McDonald's around 9:30 in the morning for breakfast. They would laugh about how Shanda's body looked like one of the sausages that they were eating from McDonald's. Lawrence then called a friend, and she told her about the murder. Tackett would then drop off Lawrence and Rippy at their homes and finally went back to her house with Melinda. Melinda would then tell Heverin that they had killed Shanda and would arrange to pick Heverin up later on that day. Well, Melinda's friend, Crystal Wathen, came over to Melinda's house, and they would also tell her what had happened. So they were just telling, I think this is 3 people now that they've told that they murdered Shanda. The 3 girls, Melinda, Crystal, and Laurie, would then leave to go pick up Amanda Heverin and bring her back to Melinda's house, where they would tell Heverin the story of what had happened. Amanda and Crystal were both leery of believing the story that the two girls were telling them until Tackett would show the two girls the trunk of the car where Shanda's bloody handprints and socks were still there. Heverin was completely shocked and sickened, so she asked to be taken home. When they pulled up to Heverin's house, Melinda would then kiss her and told her that she loved her, but pleaded for her to not tell anybody. Amanda Heverin would promise Melinda that she would not say anything before she would go to enter her house. So according to the Indy Star, witnesses would testify that Tackett she was obsessed with the occult and the notion of killing someone. She had proposed asking Shanda's ghost during a seance how it felt to die by fire. So they knew she was still alive. They knew they burnt this girl alive. So on January 11th of 1992, sometime in the morning, two boys that were brothers from Canaan was driving toward Jefferson Proving Ground to go hunting. They would notice a body that was on the side of the road when they were heading out to go hunt. So at 10:55 a.m., they would call the police, and the police would ask them to return to the corpse that was on the side of the road. One of the responding officers was a David, I think his name is David Kane. I cannot 100% confirm that, but his first name is David. But he had happened to be acquitted of his own family's murder. So he was acquitted of charges of murdering his own family. Jefferson County Sheriff Buck Shipley and other detectives began on the investigation. They were gathering forensic evidence that was located at the scene. First, they had suspected that maybe this was a drug deal gone wrong. And they didn't believe this crime would have been committed by any locals in the area. Shanda's dad, Stephen, had noticed that his daughter was missing the morning of January 11th. So he would call the neighbors and friends all morning long trying to locate his daughter, and he would then call his former wife at 1:45 p.m. No one had seen or heard from her, so him and his ex-wife would meet up to file a missing persons report with the Clark County Sheriff. Lawrence and Rippey were in hysterics going to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office with their parents at 8:20 p.m. that night. So their parents ended up taking Lawrence and Rippey to Jefferson County Sheriff's Office for them to speak about what happened. Both of the girls gave a statement. They identified the victim as Shanda, and they would name the other two girls that were involved also. So they named Loveless and Tackett. They described the events that had taken place the night as best as they were able to. Shipley would then contact the Clark County Sheriff and would identify the body found to that of missing person Shanda. Detectives would then get dental record to positively identify the victim's body was Shanda's. Loveless and Tackett were then arrested on January 12th. Most of the evidence found were based off of Lawrence and Rippey's statements. So they would immediately declare Loveless and Tackett to be tried as adults. It took a few months before prosecutors and defense attorneys would even release any information pertaining to the case, and they would only give the news media statements that Lawrence and Rippey gave. That's all the information they would give the news media. And I don't know if it's because they were underage or it's because it's an active investigation. I'm not sure why. So all four of the girls ended up being tried as adults, and they would accept a plea bargain to escape from giving the death penalty. So originally they wanted to give these girls the death penalty, and instead they took a plea bargain so that they weren't being put to death because they were being tried as adults. This is a serious crime. You don't think that kids this age would make it, but I guess they do. So like I said, like I was telling you guys about their backgrounds for a reason, because all four girls had troubled backgrounds. All of them would claim either physical or sexual abuse that was committed by a parent or another adult. Lawrence, Rippey, and Tackett, them three had histories of self-harming. Tackett was diagnosed with the borderline personality disorder, and she suffered the hallucinations. They would say Loveless was described as the ringleader in the attack against Shanda, and that she had the most extensive history of abuse and mental health issues. Tackett and Loveless both got a sentence of 60 years and would be in the Indiana Women's Prison located in Indianapolis in 1993. Tackett was released in 2018, and she served 1 year probation. Loveless was released in September of 2019. Rippey was sentenced to 60 years with a 10-year suspension for mitigating circumstances plus 10 years of medium supervision probation. A judge would then reduce Rippey's sentence to 35 years after an appeal in 2004. In exchange for Lawrence's cooperation, she was allowed to plead guilty to 1 count of criminal confinement and was sentenced to a max of 20 years. October of 2007, Loveless's attorney Mark Small would request a hearing and would argue that she be released. He would state that she had been profoundly retarded by her childhood abuse. He would then also state that she hadn't been competently represented by her counsel during her sentencing, being it caused her to accept a plea bargain from claims that were exaggerated about her receiving the death penalty. So basically he was saying they lied to her about the death penalty so she would take this plea bargain and admit to this crime. So Small also argued that she was only 16 years old when she signed this plea agreement, and she was too young to enter into a contract in the state of Indiana without having a parent or guardian consent, which proved to not have been obtained. So a guardian or parent didn't sign it, but we heard about how her parents are. So January 8th of 2008, Loveless's request would be denied, but Jefferson Circuit Judge Ted Todd, they said she could instead be eligible for parole in 15 years while maintaining her original guilty plea. November 14th of 2008, her appeal was denied by Indiana Court of Appeals, which it would end up upholding Judge Todd's ruling. So they denied her appeal and they upheld the previous judge's ruling. So Lawrence was released on December 14th of 2000 after she had served 9 years and remained on parole until December of 2002. April 28th of 2006, Rippey was released on parole after serving 14 years of her original sentence, and she would remain on supervised parole for 5 years until April of 2011. Tackett was released from Rockville Correctional Facility on January 11th of 2018, which was the 26th anniversary of Shanda's death. She served 26 years and completed an additional year of parole. Loveless was released on September 5th, 2019, after serving 26 plus years in prison, and she will serve her parole in Jefferson County, Kentucky. Shanda's father, Stephen, this is sad. Shanda's father, Stephen, ended up dying of alcoholism in 2005 when he was only 53 years old, so he was still young. Shanda's mother stated on the investigation discovery series Deadly Women that Shanda's father was so destroyed by his daughter's murder that he did everything he could to kill himself besides putting a gun to his head, and that he had drank himself to death, and that the man definitely died from a broken heart. So Shanda's father he was tore up from it, and I can't say I wouldn't be the same. So this is the case on Shanda Sharer's murder and the 4 girls that brutally tortured and murdered her over one girl being jealous. And Shanda was 12 years old. She didn't even get to be a teenager. So I'm sure she had no idea how her feelings really were. And maybe she did, but nobody deserves that. Nobody deserves that. So my thoughts are with the family, and I hope everybody has a great morning, a great day, a great night. Wherever you are in this world, please stay safe, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you.